AI doesn't automate skills or jobs, it automates tasks. Yet most organisations have no clear picture of what tasks their people actually perform. Without that understanding, preparing for AI workforce transformation is impossible. Keep listening to find out more.
Support for this podcast comes from Talent Pilot, the first end-to-end AI-native platform for recruiting. Let's be honest, no one becomes a recruiter to copy and paste CVs, chase feedback, or write interview notes. Talent Pilot is helping the role of the recruiter to quickly evolve from a junior, admin-heavy one to one of the most strategic roles in the entire organisation. With Talent Pilot, recruiters can build their own hiring workflows by deploying AI agents at different touchpoints of the recruiting process to source, screen, and select the best talent. They're offering a free demo for everyone who listens to Recruiting Future. So head over to talentpilot.com/Matt to experience the new era of recruiting. That's talentpilot.com/Matt, and it's Matt, M-A-T-T.
There's been more of scientific discovery, more of technical advancement and material progress in your lifetime and mine than in all the ages of history.
Hi there, welcome to episode 752 of Recruiting Future with me, Matt Alder. Skills, tasks, jobs, activities. These terms get used interchangeably across HR and talent acquisition, but they mean fundamentally different things. Skills are attributes of people, tasks are components of work, and jobs are bundles of activities. Having clarity here matters now more than ever. As AI begins reshaping how work gets done, organisations need a precise understanding of their workforce at the task level. Without clear taxonomies, it becomes impossible to understand how to effectively implement AI for automation and augmentation. So, how should employers be preparing to take the most advantage of the inevitable shifts that AI will bring? My guest this week is Ben Zweig, CEO of Revelio Labs and author of the new book, Job Architecture. In our conversation, he explains how to build effective taxonomies cheaply and scalably with LLMs, and why this foundation is critical for navigating change. Ben also teaches data science and the future of work at NYU Stern, and takes us through an invaluable framework for assessing the likelihood of AI-driven job displacement.
Hi Ben, and welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, happy to be here.
An absolute pleasure to have you on the show. Please, could you introduce yourself and tell everyone what you do?
Sure. Yeah, my name is Ben Zweig. I am founder, CEO of Revelio Labs. We're a workforce data company, and we collect, analyze, curate, and enrich all employment-related information in the world. That's our whole thing. You know, we collect anything and everything on the internet. So that could be, online profiles and resumes, online job ads, sentiment ratings from review sites like Glassdoor and Fishbowl, et cetera. And, all these other tertiary data sets. There could be layoff notices, immigration filings, freelance platforms. And we take that all in and we try to make sense of what's happening to the labor market in macro sense, but also what's happening within firms. Where are they growing? Where are they shrinking? Where are they recruiting people from, losing people to? What are the better, markets or teams or strategies? So we really try to, help organizations do better talent intelligence, workforce planning, and just better analytics in general by having all this nice and neat data that they could use.
Fantastic. And you've written a book, which is coming out soon. Tell us about the book. What's it about? Why did you write it?
Yeah, that's right. It's called Job Architecture. So it's really about taxonomies at its core. And I think I've been in analytical HR for a long time. I started my career as a labor economist and then ran workforce analytics at IBM. And over that time, really found that the core of any analysis within HR is about groups of people. And the way that those people get grouped is really tricky, really complicated, and it is what good analysis lives and dies by. What separates a good analysis from a bad analysis is the strength of their taxonomies, of how they categorize people. It's so important and doesn't get enough discussion. And, I felt like there's not a lot of authority in the space. Sometimes I see people kind of misusing terms like skills and jobs and, tasks and stuff like that. And I just wanted to write a book to give clarity into how all those things fit together and why it's important and how to use technology to do it, better, faster, cheaper. I think one lesson that I want people to remember is that you don't need to, spend $2 million and hire, a consulting team from Mercer or something. That's just not necessary for job architecture projects. And it's really important, but it can be done cheaply and scalably using large language models. They're really good at that sort of thing.
Yeah, because I think that you come across the phrase taxonomies a lot when talking about skills-based organizations and skills-based hiring and all of those things, really in the context of companies really struggling to classify the skills and the jobs they have within the organization. What are the common mistakes that people make? What are the sort of the wrong definitions that people are using? What's kind of going wrong? How do you clarify it for everyone?
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, even as you're bringing it up, I think you're saying it comes up a lot in skill-based planning, skill-based organizations, and it's interesting. I mean, it should, but I think so much of the attention has been around using taxonomies when trying to become more skills-based, and I think that is an issue because skills are not the right unit of observation for analyzing jobs. They're really independent concepts. So, sometimes we see vendors in the space talk about jobs as if they're made up of skills. And that's just fundamentally wrong. Skills are not attributes of jobs. They're not parts of jobs. Skills are attributes of people. And jobs can really be broken down into tasks and activities. So I think if you do want to do some sort of reconstruction and deconstruction, deconstruction and reconstruction, so kind of reverse the order there, you really need to have a good taxonomy of work activities. That's really important. And I think even doing the, better skills analysis and skill-based workforce planning requires you to have a good understanding of what the work activities are, because skills are really inputs into completing work activities. And without understanding the work that gets done, it's very hard to have a good understanding of skills. So one big mistake is not getting to the tasks and work activities level fast enough. I think sometimes people kind of hand wave their way past the importance of that. And I think that's a big mistake.
And I guess also, and I think this is perhaps something we can talk about a little bit later in the conversation, it's even more critical for organizations now to understand those tasks as they're looking at AI and efficiencies and all these kind of things. So it's kind of critically important, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. I think it's really bringing to light the importance of tasks because, AI or really any technology for that matter does not automate skills. These things don't have skills. And it doesn't automate jobs wholesale. It automates components of jobs. And those components of jobs are really tasks and activities. So I think, just having that be so in our face every day, everyone's talking about and thinking about, how technology affects work. It's really about how it affects the components of jobs, parts of a workflow. So that is really the right lens to think about. How does automation affect my workforce? How does it affect, the people that work here, the jobs that they do? So we really need to have a good way to kind of deconstruct jobs into their components. And then that has implications into what are the attributes of people that you want? What's the mix of skills and really other traits, experience levels and ambitions and attitudes that complement the work activities that will be more important when technology can automate some of those work activities.
Absolutely. So what is it that employers need to think about? How do they do this? Because as you say, I think people sort of see this as a daunting task. They might not be going about it in the right way. An instant response is we need to buy expensive software or get some consultants in to do it. What's the kind of solution to this?
Yeah. So I think just, having the right framework is the first step. Knowing what's a job, what's a task, what's a skill, what's a seniority level, what's an industry. Just making sure these concepts don't get muddied. I think that's if you can like have a good framework for that, you're already in the lead. And then I think it really rests on getting the right representation of each activity, job, skill, whatever it is. And by representation, I really mean like a mathematical representation. So what large language models are really good at is really finding similarities between certain entities or concepts. So let's just take jobs, for example. You have a job title, and it could be, you have a job title that says lawyer, another job title that says attorney. And, we know intuitively that those are really synonyms. But, how do we do that at scale? There's a million other examples where we don't know that intuitively and we can't, do this manually. So we need to, put these, job titles into a large language model and get a mathematical representation of each one. So just to get a little mathy here, when we put something like a job title, what we want is a vector. A vector is just a list of numbers, and we get that for lawyer, and then we get another list of numbers for attorney, and then we can just compute distance, and distance is just the simple way we learned distance in grade school. It's a squared plus b squared equals c squared. That's just the distance between two things, and we want, and if something has a sufficiently small distance between two things, we can say, all right, we can cluster them together. We can say they are part of the same group, and that has to be done kind of at scale. And if things are different, then we say, if things have a large distance, then we say they're part of different groups. This is something that is not so trivial. It can't be done in a day, but it's not something that needs to take big teams many months to do. It's relatively straightforward. I think a talented team that knows how to do math and write basic code, I think can do this in a matter of weeks. And so there's really a few steps. There's the embedding, which is getting the set of numbers for each thing that you want to find numbers for. That could be a job title, could be a skill, could be a sentence that describes what people do in their work activities. And once you have a set of numbers, then we need to find similarity and group them together, and that's really that's clustering. So we have to do clustering, and we have to find groups of these entities. So there's embedding, there's clustering, and then there's labeling. Once you have a group of all these job titles, let's say you have lawyer, attorney, counsel, associate attorney. You have all these different sets of job titles. You have to find a label for that group. Maybe you can just use the most common title, or maybe you want to do some summarization. Like sometimes, if you have, physical therapist and speech therapist and occupational therapist, you don't just want to pick the most common one. You don't want to say, oh, that's the cluster of speech therapists. Maybe you want some title that's like therapeutic professions or something. And that's also what LLMs are really good at, generating summarized labels. So there's a way to kind of just label them and get a good intuitive name for that group. And then, this is something that I think doesn't get enough attention, but is really important. We have to think very carefully about versioning. So when we have groups, those things change. The labor market evolves and transforms all the time. And even if the labor market doesn't change, businesses may change and their priorities may change. They may have a merger with someone else and, expand the professions, or, you want some alignment to lines of business or something. With that versioning, I think we really have to think about what's the criterion where we think that something is emerging. We have to be able to introduce new jobs. And then, maybe we have some obsolescence. Maybe something is becoming obsolete and we don't really care about it anymore, and we want to group it in with something else. We have to have a process for making sure that that can happen so that we don't have to go back to the drawing board every year or two.
And obviously, it's not a simple task, but it's something that's now much more accessible as technology's kind of moved on. What are the advantages for companies of doing this from a talent management, a talent acquisition, a business process perspective? What's the kind of the upside of having this done properly?
Yeah, I mean, the short kind of tongue-in-cheek answer is so that their analysis doesn't suck. So, that's one way to think about it. If you don't do this, then you're going to end up comparing groups that just make no sense. And, I had this example when I was doing this at IBM where we were ranking kind of like the occupations that were like most in demand and least in demand. And at the top of the list, there was like SAP consultant. And at the bottom of the list, it was like SAP implementation consultant. And we were like, okay, these are really the same thing. Like, why is one showing up like, really healthy and the other like, really unhealthy? And, it was really just, an artifact of these being poorly categorized to begin with. So we weren't really able to have good results until we, created a meaningful taxonomy. And that project was really about, identifying like where we wanted to hire more and where we wanted to, shrink the business. So that was really just for workforce planning, aligning the workforce of the business to the needs of the business. And so once you have a good, grouping, set of people, then of course you need metrics for all of those to identify, what's strategic, what's important, where demand is high, and availability, and compare that. So just kind of knowing what you need and how much you need really rests on having good groupings of people. And also for talent acquisition, I think it's particularly important as well, because you're going out there to the market where the market has some language of what's similar and what's not. And if you're using the wrong words, the wrong titles, the wrong skills to recruit people, you're going to end up finding the wrong people or finding the wrong pools of talent. So, I mean, we see so many examples where, companies, try to source from a certain location, and they go in and they say, well, they find out that, these locations or these markets just don't have the people they need. And then they're kind of stuck. So I think being really, deliberate about where to find, the right pools of talent is critical for sourcing. And then just for actual recruiting as well. We want to make sure that the actual individual people coming through the pipeline are pursuing the opportunities that they think they're pursuing. We don't want to put them in front of something and then, whoops, 2 weeks later, they realize, oh, this actually isn't the job I thought it was.
Now, I want to come back to AI, but also in the context that you also teach future of work at NYU. So I'm just interested, sort of pulling this all together, where you think we're kind of going with the AI jobs situation. Is AI going to take jobs away? What do you think is going to happen? How is this how is it going to pan out?
Yeah, I mean, this is like the big question that, economists have been asking for at least 100 years. So, are we going to see technological unemployment? Does technology displace labor? It's a huge question, hugely important. It hasn't in the past. I mean, I think there's very limited cases where technology has created any sort of unemployment. So this idea of technological unemployment is, historically just been an idea. Now, that's not to say it couldn't happen in the future. And sometimes this time really is different. This technology really could be just fundamentally distinct from technological shocks in the past. So I think the way that I think about this is that there's really three kinds of forces which are important to pay attention to when we think about labor displacement. One is the sensitivity of firms to new technology. So, firms are the organizing unit of labor. They represent the demand side for labor markets, and they can adopt technology quickly or slowly. And, if they adopt technology quickly, then that's more of a shock. If they adopt technology slowly, then that happens more slowly. So, it depends. We have to think about how quickly is adoption taking place? How quickly are firms adopting new technology? If it's slow, then that gives plenty of time for workers to kind of, select into companies that or companies or roles that they're like less vulnerable to automation. So that's one factor. I think what we're seeing is that firms are pretty slow. So that makes me a little less nervous. I mean, not great for productivity, but probably good for unemployment. The other is how sensitive are workers to new technology? So, workers are the supply side of labor markets. Are they responsive to new technology? If workers can change their career, change their occupation very quickly, then great. We have an adaptive workforce and we have nothing to worry about. If someone, decides what they're going to do, the minute they enter the workforce, the labor force, and then stick with that, and they can't really budge, then we're in trouble. Then we have a rigid labor force, and so I think that's a bit of a mixed story. So I think young workers, excuse me, are learning more general skills, and I think there is more of an ability to kind of reestablish someone's career. I think the one of the best examples of clear automation at the occupation level, and I should say automation typically happens at the task level, very rarely happens at the occupation level. But one example where it did happen at the occupation level was in the case of telephone operators. So there was a telephone operator, and then there was a totally new system where telephone operators were just not needed at all, and that job just completely went away. And that really also didn't result in technological unemployment, mostly because labor markets, the labor supply was very responsive. So, people who were telephone operators went into other professions. They became, secretaries at the time, now administrative assistants, typists. They got absorbed into the labor market very quickly. So that really didn't result in much of a labor market shock. And the third factor, which I think is actually the most important factor, is about how responsive jobs are to reconfiguration, to reconfiguring themselves to technology. So, we have a job is you can think of it like a bundle of tasks, a bundle of work activities. And, let's say someone's brought in to do 20 things, and, 4 of those get automated, and they're left doing, 16 things. Do they do more of those 16 things? Do they do those, are they just more concentrated? Do they introduce new tasks and expand back to 20? And there's some 4 new tasks that we, didn't think about or didn't know about. And I think, there are some organizations where that can happen very fluidly, very, very quickly. And some organizations that are really, really procedural, and jobs are just very rigid. And someone's, brought in to be a specialist in a certain process, and they can't easily adapt. They can't easily change their job. So I think that's the factor that I'm really paying the most attention to. Because I think if workers can kind of reconfigure their job, sometimes it's called job crafting, then I think we'll have nothing to worry about. But I do get very concerned about these like large bureaucratic procedural organizations that don't have a lot of flexibility and adaptability in their jobs. And that is making me nervous.
Absolutely. And it kind of makes the whole taxonomy thing even more important, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is that I think they'll be able to adapt more flexibly if they have the right taxonomy of work activities, because then you'll be able to see when there's some, technology creep, and you can say, oh, well, a year ago they were doing these sets of activities and now it's shrunk. So I think that can act like a call to action, and just an alert system where you can show the strategic workforce planning group or the heads of HR, whoever, or the business units ideally, that people aren't being properly utilized. And I think when people's jobs are narrow, that typically is worse for the worker. I think workers enjoy having more diversity in their role than less. So I think if that starts to happen, I think there should be concerns in the organization. I think they should start trying to reconfigure who does what, shift the borders of the organization. I think that really calls for some sort of action, whether it's a reorg or whether it's hiring different types of workers or whatever it is. I think that just tracking that is useful.
Absolutely. And as a final question for you, if we kind of look ahead sort of 3, 4, 5 years time, I mean, how do you think things are going to evolve? Let me sort of put it this way to you. If we're having this conversation again in 3 years time, what would we be talking about?
It's a great question. I've been thinking and kind of hoping. So, part of this is, a hope more than a prediction, but I've been really hoping for the last, 7 to 10 years that labor markets start looking more like capital markets. In the world of capital markets, and I should mention, labor markets are twice as big as capital markets. There's about 2/3 of the economy of economic output is attributable to labor, and about 1/3 is attributable to capital. But capital markets are really efficient. That's finance. There's a whole field of finance which is allocated to the which is really responsible for the efficient allocation of capital. And there are some people who think about the efficient allocation of labor, but they're very few and far between. And there's not a lot of science, there's not a lot of math, there's not a lot of rigor, and there's not a lot of data. I mean, I think we're trying to change that by introducing more data and rigor. But I really think and hope that in 3 to 5 years, if and when we have this conversation again, we'll really be looking at a labor market that is scientific in new ways, where we're just going to have more ubiquity of information, more shared definitions, more adaptability in how people think about how employees are categorized, in how organizations can react to shocks. I think there will be more conventional wisdom, more science, and I think that will result in organizations that are more adaptable, smarter, and allocate labor much more efficiently. So that's my hope. I don't know if we'll get there in 3 to 5 years, but I think we'll get there in 10 years.
Absolutely. Ben, thank you very much for talking to me.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me.
My thanks to Ben. You can follow this podcast on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can search all the past episodes at recruitingfuture.com. On that site, you can also subscribe to our weekly newsletter, Recruiting Future Feast, and get the inside track on everything that's coming up on the show. Thanks very much for listening. I'll be back next time, and I hope you'll join me.
This is my show.